this is Sally Flashberger from the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and we're here for another Living Well Wednesday. We are glad to be joined today by Jenny Newgart and Wendy Hine from the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition. They're going to talk about the upcoming February primary and all the things you need to know about voting. So I'm going to just turn it over to them because they're going to run this whole Living Well Wednesday today. So thanks for joining us. If you have questions, you can post them in the chat if you're on Zoom or in the comments if you're on Facebook Live, and we will answer them throughout. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm not sure who's starting. I think maybe Jenny. So I'm going to turn it over. She's going to open up our PowerPoint. So thanks a lot, Jenny.
All right, thank you. I'll open up our PowerPoint as I'm introducing myself. I'm Jenny Newgart from the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. And along with Disability Rights Wisconsin, we coordinate the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition. And our coalition is, our main purpose is really to make sure that people with disabilities know what their voting rights are, know how they can participate in the electoral process, and just really making sure that nobody with a disability gets left behind. So we spread information through webinars like this, but we also have a pretty active social media page on Facebook. We send out regular email updates. We have an e-newsletter. We have a core group of people that meets monthly to talk about activities we're going to work on. So there's lots of different ways that people can get involved with voting and get voting information, including our website at Disability Vote, Disability Vote, where we've got like all of our fact sheets and things like that that you can look up for informational purposes. So today, though, we want to focus on the spring primary election because we feel like it's an election that's flying a little bit under the radar, and it really is an important one. So we're going to talk about what you should know about the election, and then also go into some of the basics about registering or voting absentee, those kinds of things. So let me see if I can, there we go. So I'll have Wendy introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Wendy Hine, and I'm with Disability Rights Wisconsin, and I co-lead the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition with Jenny. We just wanted to share with you some things about these upcoming elections. So welcome. Turn it back over to Jenny then, and we can get started.
Oh, actually, we're going right into you, Wendy.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Then I have to play with my mute button for a second. Okay. So we're going to talk about the 2021 spring elections, and they're under the radar for a lot of people because a lot of us are still thinking about that big November election and then the inauguration, and that was a lot of months of thinking about federal offices. But here in Wisconsin, we have a primary coming up February 16th. We have 7 people who are running for the state superintendent of public instruction. And I'm going to talk to you about that big name, state superintendent of public instruction, in just a few minutes. But so at that spring primary, it'll be narrowed down from those 7 people running to 2. And then April 6th, the spring election, those 2 people will be on the ballot, and one of them will be chosen to be the new state superintendent of public instruction. On that ballot in April will also be Court of Appeals judges for districts 1, 2, and 3, and the circuit court judge. And then there might be some local offices like alderman or school board, depending on where you live. There's going to be some special partisan primaries and a partisan election in districts 89 and district 13. So those are things that you'll want to watch for when you check. We're going to talk to you about how to check your ballot and see what's on it. And those are things that you would see on your ballot so that you know if you have to vote for those positions. Next slide. So what is the state superintendent of public instruction? So that's the person who oversees our public school district. So if public schools are important to you, this person looks at ways to improve them, ways to improve teacher education. And one really big thing that this superintendent does that affects students with disabilities is this person oversees how students with disabilities are being served and if they're being well served. So this position is pretty important, especially for folks who might use an IEP at school. The state superintendent of public instruction is also in charge of libraries. So libraries are a pretty big, important part of our communities, and that's something that's also underneath the state superintendent of public instruction. Next slide. We also saw that in April, there will be circuit court judges on the ballot, and there are 249 circuit court judges in the state of Wisconsin. So that's a lot. There's one in at least one in each county. There are several in some counties. And these are nonpartisan positions, as is the state superintendent of Department of Public Instruction, the DPI state superintendent that we just talked about. They're nonpartisan, and that means that they're not Democrat or Republican. The circuit court judges serve for 6 years. Circuit court is a court that impacts with people with disabilities when they do things like guardianships, when they have when they go through a process for mental health commitments, or if there are families who have terminations of parental rights or CHIPS petitions. Those things are things that circuit court judges make decisions about. So the things that they make decisions about are things that affect a lot of people in the disability community. Next slide. So those two positions are really important to us as folks in the disability. We use schools, we use libraries. Schools can be a huge, important part of our transition process as we go into the working world. Circuit court judges are really important, we said, because of guardianships or mental health commitments, things like that. So now that we know that it's so important for us to vote for those positions and to have people in those offices who think that the things that are important to us are also important to them, we're going to talk about how we can make sure that we're able to vote in February. So we can register to vote still today online at www.myvote.wi.gov. Today's actually the last day. If you want to vote on February 16th, today's the last day to register online. You can also make sure that you're registered by looking there. And the cool thing in Wisconsin is that you don't run out of time to register to vote. You can still register on election day at your polling place. Or you can register until the week before election day at your municipal clerk's office. So there are still options to register, but today you can do it online if you still need to. Next slide. Again, the registration deadlines for the spring primary are at the municipal clerk's office until February 12th. That's the week before the election. In person until February 16th, and online and by mail, today is the last day. So if you're watching this right now and you're thinking, I want to register online, just go straight from this to your computer and get going as soon as we're done. This is the website that you would use if you wanted to register online. It's www.myvote.wi.gov. It's such a really handy website. So if you see there's little brown or gray tabs at the top, my voter info, find my polling place, what's on my ballot. That's that one that I mentioned to you where you can see if you have local races, what's on my ballot. It'll show you exactly what's going to be on your ballot. Update my name or address and register to vote. So if you need to register and you want to do it online, you can go here and do it right after our session. Down at the bottom, there's the little blue tabs. You can click on those too, and they'll get you information as well. So we love this website, very, very user-friendly, myvote.wi.gov. So we're going to talk about what documents you need to vote, to register to vote. So to register to vote, you have to prove that you live where you're voting. So you have to proof of residence document is required. So if you register online today still, you would need a valid driver's license or valid state ID with your current address on it. The registration then will use that license or ID as that proof. You can also, when you register in your clerk's office or you're at your polling place on election day, you can use a current utility bill, a lease, a paycheck or pay stub, a university ID card, or other official document that includes your name and your current address. If you live in a group home, nursing home, or assisted living facility and you have an intake document, that will work perfectly. There are a lot more proof of residence documents that work well for this. And you can go to myvote.wi.gov and the proof of residence right there, and it'll have a whole list of them. So your proof of residence document shows that you live where you say that you do. You also, to vote, need a photo ID. So to register, you don't need the photo ID. You can use your photo ID to show that your proof of residence. It can be your proof of residence document, but all those other documents work as well. When you vote, you do need to have a photo ID to show that you are who you say that you are. Now, when you show your photo ID on election day, it doesn't have to include your current address. So if you have a photo ID that has an old address on it, you can still use that to show that you are who you say you are. You would just need, when you register, to have that proof of residence document as well. If you want to, there are some exemptions to the photo ID rules, and we'll talk to you about that later, but most voters do need a photo ID to vote. If you vote absentee and you request an absentee ballot online, you'll actually upload a picture of your photo ID. And then that will count as your photo ID to get that absentee ballot. So here are some pictures of the acceptable photo IDs on this next slide. In Wisconsin, the one that I want to point out to you, so the one that most people use is a state ID or a driver's license. But all these other ones work as well: passport book or passport card, a tribal ID, a university or college, tech college. But in that top corner of this document, it shows you this, it almost looks like an ID, but that's a receipt. And that's the receipt that you get when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, to get your free ID for voting. When you go in to do that, they aren't going to give you that free ID right away that day. They're going to give you this receipt, and they're going to tell you your ID will be mailed to you. Your receipt though has like that little barcode on it that you can see, and then it has your picture, and that receipt actually will work as an acceptable photo ID. So if you go to the DMV, and you don't have a lot of time between the time when you go to get your your ID, your free ID for voting, and the day that you go to vote on polling day, you can take that receipt and that counts as your ID. That's an acceptable form of photo ID. So that's the time when you would want to keep your receipt. The next slide talks about if I don't have an acceptable photo ID for voting, how do I get that state ID? Well, that's that place that I mentioned to you, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV. And these are located all over the state. You can look up where they are at that, at the third bullet there. It says DMV Customer Service Centers. It will show you where one is near you. You go in and you can get your free ID for voting. Now, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, provides a lot of different services. So you want to make sure that you're using the words free ID for voting when you go in, and they will take your picture and take some information from you. And you do need to bring some documentation, which is all listed at bringit.wi.gov. And sometimes people go to that website and they see the things that they need to bring, like a birth certificate, social security card, things like that. And they don't have those items. Well, you can still get your free ID for voting. When you go to the DMV, you take the items that you do have, and then I don't have all the items. Here's what I have. And they'll give you some extra paperwork to fill out there. And they are able then to give you your free ID for voting. If you have questions, there are a couple of phone numbers there where you can get help, because this process can feel difficult. That there's at the second bullet, there's a DMV voter ID hotline number. And then at the bottom, there is the Wisconsin Voter ID Coalition. And those are both numbers where you can get help if you have difficulty. You can also contact us, and I'll be sharing that 1-800 number with you as well. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Wendy. So we're going to talk about how to request an absentee ballot. A lot of people, record numbers, have voted absentee in the past several elections because of the pandemic. And we expect that that trend will continue for a little bit yet. So if you want to request an absentee ballot, you can do that online very easily at that website we showed you earlier, the My Vote Wisconsin website. The very first time that you make a request for an absentee ballot, you need to upload your photo ID. And most people do that by taking a picture on their phone and then uploading the picture to the website. That can be a little complicated for some people who just have difficulty with technology. So that may be a barrier that you can ask for assistance with. Sometimes through the Vote Coalition, we can try to walk people through that. But if that's not a big barrier for you, online is really the quickest and easiest way to request your ballot. You can also do it by mail. There's an application for absentee ballot that you can get off the Election Commission website, and then you mail that completed application to your municipal clerk, and you still need to include a copy of your photo ID. So you need to make a photocopy of it somewhere. You can email your clerk the request and just include your name, your voting address, the address where you want the ballot sent if it's different, and which elections you want a ballot for. Also on the website, you can choose if you just want a ballot for the upcoming election. You can choose specific elections, or you can just click for the entire year, and then you don't have to worry about it. Again, if you make the request by email, you need to include a copy of that photo ID unless it's already on file. Or you can apply for an absentee ballot at your clerk's office. And if you don't know who your clerk is, you can also get that information on the My Vote website. So those are the ways you can get an absentee ballot, and you will need an ID for all of those. But again, only once. The first time you make the request for your absentee ballot, you include it. After that, they keep it on file, so you don't have to do that every time. And it literally takes about 2 minutes after you've dealt with the photo ID to request a ballot again if you do it online. So early voting or in-person absentee. Yeah.
Jenny, can I ask a question? There is a question on Facebook, like how long does it take to, once you request an absentee ballot? So there was somebody who said they requested at the beginning of the month and their parents last week. Is there, they can check that on My Vote, right? Whether it's been received and their request
Yeah.
has been received and if it's been mailed, correct?
Correct. And I actually have a slide that shows what that page looks like on the website. So I'll show that to you. You can also call the clerk's office if you're getting concerned. I don't know off the top of my head when the ballot became available. Do you, Wendy?
So yesterday
Email it.
was a day that the municipal clerks had to send ballots out. That was a deadline for them for absentee voters that are already on file with requests. Yesterday, so if you were already on file with a request, yesterday was a deadline for them to need to have started to send them out by yesterday. And then as they come in, they'll respond to future absentee. So I mean, I would say that people should expect to start receiving them within the next week or two. Mail has been a little on the slow side. So we did hear in the last election that a lot of people who always get an absentee ballot were surprised how long it took. But I do believe that they went out by yesterday. So
Great. Thanks, Wendy. So the other option or another option you have is to vote early, sometimes called in-person absentee voting. So you can go to your clerk's office before election day. You can also register to vote at that time if you haven't done that, and vote early. And sometimes that's a nice option because you might not be faced with lines that are as long or as many people as you would on election day. And some people just prefer to vote in person. So that's another opportunity. Each municipality does set their own dates and hours for in-person voting. So you need to contact your clerk to find out what those hours and locations are. In-person voting runs from February 2nd through February 14th. A new feature on My Vote Wisconsin is listing what those early voting locations are and the hours. However, the municipal clerks are responsible for providing that information to be put on the website. So if you go and don't see anything for your municipality, it means your clerk didn't provide that information. So a lot of places do have it where you could just check the My Vote website and save yourself a phone call. But if it's not there, then contact your clerk and they will definitely be able to tell you when you could vote in person early. So here are the key dates for absentee voters. This is different than what Wendy was talking about. So the deadline to request an absentee ballot for a regular voter is by February 11th at 5 p.m. If you're indefinitely confined voter, and I'll explain what that is in more detail in a minute, that's February 12th. But we really recommend that you request it as soon as possible. And I would say no later than February 1st, because you have to think about if you request it on that deadline, and then by the time you receive it in the mail, there's definitely not going to be time for you to complete it and mail it back. But it could be close if you get it at all. And people have experienced that where they never did receive their ballot. If you didn't ever receive your ballot and you requested one, you can still go vote in person though. A lot of people don't know that. And then the deadline to return the absentee ballot is February 16th, 8 p.m. That is election day, and 8 p.m. is when the polls close. So again, if you're returning it by mail, make sure you mail it back as soon as you can and allow at least a week to 10 days to make sure they get it by that February 16th deadline. So if you're having a hard time getting to the polls and you want to make sure you always get your absentee ballot, one of the things you can do is be an indefinitely confined voter. So this is a voter who chooses that option because maybe their age, they have difficulty getting around, illness, infirmity, or disability. And when you become an indefinitely confined voter, it means that they will mail you an absentee ballot for every election until you either don't return a ballot or you tell the clerk you don't want to be indefinitely confined anymore. And according to the Wisconsin Elections Commission, the designation of indefinitely confined status is for each voter to make based upon their current circumstances. It does not require permanent or total inability to travel outside of the residence. Statutes do not establish the option to require proof or documentation from indefinitely confined voters. So again, that means that you decide if you think you're an indefinitely confined voter, and you don't have to prove that. And it doesn't mean that you can't ever leave your house. It could mean that you have a disability or illness that maybe it's unpredictable and you don't know from a day-to-day basis if you'll be able to get out. And so the safest option for you might be to choose indefinitely confined. If you are an indefinitely confined voter, you don't need to provide a photo ID. And then to be an indefinitely confined voter, it's really easy. You pretty much just have to check the option on the application for absentee ballot. It's in section 6, and there's just a box that you would check that says indefinitely confined and that you are certifying that you are indefinitely confined. You can also send that request in writing to your municipal clerk or by an email. And on the website, it's really easy. There's a checkbox on the website, and you just click that checkbox. The absentee ballot needs a witness. If you get an absentee ballot, somebody who has verified that you were the one who completed that ballot. So you need to make sure that the witness sees you marking the ballot, but they don't need to be close enough that they see who you voted for. And they should see you put the ballot in the envelope, and then they sign the envelope on the line that says signature of witness. And you can see in the picture there, we've highlighted it. And what people miss a lot with the absentee ballot is writing their full address underneath the witness signature. So it's not enough just to sign it. You need the full address, the street, city, state, and zip code on there. And that's important because your vote might not count if all of that is not on there. Now, a lot of times you have a chance to correct that. If that were sent back and that were missing, clerks would contact you and give you a chance to fix it. However, if they get it, the day of the election or the day before, there's a good chance there's not going to be time to get that fixed, and your vote might not count. So it's very important that there's the signature and the full address. So some people, especially in the disability community, have had a hard time getting a witness to sign their envelope, especially if they live alone. So to be a witness, somebody needs to be a US citizen and over the age of 18. It can be a friend, a spouse, a neighbor, somebody in your family, maybe a care worker that comes in and out of the house. Some communities offer drop-off locations and may have a staff person available to witness you filling out your ballot. Those were a lot more common, in the big presidential race, but there may be some options still for drop-off locations. We have often recommended with the pandemic that, whoever the person is could watch you through a window and put the ballot in the envelope. You can seal it, you can leave it outside the door, and then they can do their witness part. They can return it for you, or they could give it back for you to return. So that's a contactless way of having a witness take care of your ballot for you. And if you're still having trouble, contact the clerk, your clerk at your municipality, and they may be able to help you figure out what to do for a witness. So here's the bar we had talked about earlier with the question that came up. This is what you would see on the MyVote website for your absentee ballot request. So you can see this is an older election, but I made the request on June 15th. They approved it that same day. It shows when they're preparing your absentee ballot. So that may be something that you could look up if you haven't gotten it yet, but have they started preparing it? They show you the actual date that they've sent it and when they anticipate you'll get it. And then the last box here is when they've received it. And this makes me feel better. It's a little nerve-wracking sometimes with absentee ballot, like, did they get it? Is my vote going to count? But if this box is lit up blue, you can be rest assured that they have it in their hands and that your vote will be counted. And I just want to reiterate this again because it's so important. If you requested that absentee ballot and it didn't arrive, you can still go vote on election day or vote early at your clerk's office. So how do you get to the polls? That's a big challenge for a lot of people with disabilities. Your best bet is to go to Google, find a ride to the polls, and they have lots of options listed there. You can call your local independent living center or your aging and disability resource center, and we've got a statewide number there to give you more specific options in your community. It's really hard for us as a vote coalition, being statewide, to be able to get down, drill down into individual communities. So those are really great resources to help you with transportation. But also, can you flex your schedule so you could go with a neighbor or a friend or a family member? And the Vote Coalition did put together a whole list of ideas of other ways that you might be able to get to the polls if you'd like to vote in person. So you can check that out on our website. And then again, some tips for staying safe. So, lots of people like to vote in person. I prefer to do it in person. I've been choosing absentee in the pandemic, but looking forward to going back in person. So if you do choose to go, we just put together some tips to try to keep you safe. And I think one of the biggest ones is know who you want to vote for so you can get in and get out as quickly as possible. And Wendy had mentioned on the My Vote site, you can check the ballot. So you put in your address, excuse me, so you see exactly who is on your ballot, which could be different than the ballot from a town 5 miles away. So you'll know exactly what you're going to see when you go to vote. You can make a cheat sheet and bring that with you if that's easier. You can curbside vote if you can't get into a polling place because of a disability. I've got a little more detail on that in a minute. We recommend you check your polling place before you go. There were a lot of changes since the pandemic began in polling locations. So make sure that you know where it is and maybe see if they offer drive-through voting. Again, that was pretty big in, last April's election and the presidential election. But you can see if anybody's doing it for these elections. If you have to get out of your car, do the social distancing of 6 feet, washing your hands thoroughly before and especially after you go, and wear a mask. Be patient and courteous. The election workers have really been challenged in this pandemic, and they really do try to do their best. So, if you run into issues, like disability-wise or something like that, just try to be patient and work it out maybe with the election official on site. And then you can bring your own black pen, although most places I think are just letting you keep the pen. So curbside voting is something a lot of people don't know about, and it's a really handy feature. It is required by law for a voter who can't enter the polling place because of their disability. So maybe you can get into, say it's a church, you can get into the church, but then there's, like a half a flight of stairs to get down to where the voting is. Or maybe the sidewalks aren't clear and you have a difficulty walking over the snow or just difficulty walking in general. You can use curbside voting. And the Wisconsin Election Committee believes that people who are immunocompromised or have symptoms of COVID-19 should be eligible for curbside voting too. So just the fact that if you have a disability that would make you more vulnerable to getting COVID and the effects of COVID would be much more harmful to you, that's a reason to use curbside voting. So it should be available during in-person absentee voting as well. So if you do that early voting, it should also be an option then. But we really, really recommend that you contact your municipal clerk first and before election day. They're really busy on election day, no matter what the size of the election, to figure out what process did they use. It's very different depending on where you vote. Some have you just honk a horn, some have you ring a doorbell. The best way is to have a a phone number posted, and you can just call from your cell phone. And then accessible voting machines. So every polling place is also required by law to have at least one accessible voting system. And that system must provide the opportunity for voters to vote privately and independently. So you can kind of see this picture here. If people are walking behind her, that's not private and independent. So they could just turn that machine so that not everybody is seeing what she's doing. But that's something to look for. Anyone can use the accessible voting machine. And best practice would be that poll workers would offer the use of that machine to anybody that comes in. It is not just for a person with a disability. And then election officials are required to make sure that it's functioning properly, that it's set up and ready to go, and that there are people trained on it if somebody needed help. And we have heard lots of complaints about that not happening. So something to be aware of when you go. Most of the places do a great job, but we have heard instances where it's not been set up or people didn't know how to use it. So I'm gonna throw this back over to Wendy.
Okay, so I want to be really mindful of your time. So what I'm gonna do is give you a real brief overview of each of our slides, because we do have a few things left to talk about. The first one is, can you vote if you have a guardian in Wisconsin? And yes, there are a lot of misunderstandings about guardianships, but in Wisconsin, a person under guardianship retains the right to vote unless the judge specifically removes it, unless the court specifically takes it away. And this slide talks about where to look on that on your documents, or how to get those documents. We also have a great brochure at our website that talks about it as well. And you can contact us at our 1-800 number if you need help figuring out what your guardianship says. We would be happy to talk you through how to figure that out. Calling your municipal clerk is a great way too. They have a list of people who have been judged incompetent or ineligible to vote. So that's a great option as well. But yes, most people who have a guardian are able to vote. The next slides talk about your rights. What are your rights as a voter with a disability? Well, the right of every single American voter is to vote privately and independently. And as a voter with disabilities, you have some rights that allow you to do that. So you have the right to access the polling place. You have the right to be able to physically get into the polling place. In order to vote, you have to be able to be there, to get there, unless you choose to absentee vote. And that means sometimes ramps, that might mean elevators. You have the right to physically access the polling place. You have the right to use that machine that Jenny talked about, the accessible voting machine at your polling place. There are a lot of voters who might need help if they weren't able to use that accessible voting machine. Maybe they have a vision impairment, and that accessible voting machine allows them to vote privately and independently. You have the right to ask for accommodations, things like a chair to sit in if you can't stand in line, a signature guide, a magnifying glass. One thing that a lot of people need an accommodation for is the requirement to state your name and address. When you walk into the polling place, they ask you to state your name and address. And if people have, if they're nonverbal, or if they speak sign language, they may need an accommodation to state their name and address, and that is allowed. You have the right to have assistance marking your ballot. So as I said, you have the right to vote privately and independently. You also have the right to have help. You just can't have your employer or your union representative help you, but you can have anyone else help you. It doesn't even need to be a qualified voter. So if you want to bring your 13-year-old sister with you to help you, that's your choice. You can do that. You also have the right to that curbside voting that Jenny talked about if you can't get in because of a disability. If you feel like your rights have been violated, if your voting experience was had obstacles, you can file a complaint. And that's a really important thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. One other thing you can do is you can bring a cheat sheet with you. A lot of people don't know that, but that can be really helpful in those small local races when there are a lot of things, a lot of people to remember. Sometimes in my town, there's like 5 positions on the town board or whatever. And a lot of times I have to look up all the people, and then I bring myself a cheat sheet saying who I preferred so that I can remember. And that is allowed. You can write it on your hand like you did in high school if you want to. Not that I did that in high school. If you make a mistake, you can request another ballot from the election officials. That's allowed. And you have the right to vote. Remember, we said privately and independently. And that means independently means no one should tell you how to vote. No one. Can people share their opinions with each other? Absolutely. And can you ask opinions? Yes. But no one should tell you how to vote, not even your guardian. Your vote is your vote, no one else's. So remember, I talked to you about filing a complaint when I talked about your rights. Well, this next slide says, what do I do if I run into a problem? If I run into a problem, oh, I skipped a slide. I apologize.
Yep.
It talks about how can I be an informed voter, but I will talk to you about if you have a problem in a minute. So it's hard to to get good information. I think we all are so well aware of that right now. So what you can do is go to that website that Jenny showed you, the myvote.wi.gov, and print out your ballot so you know exactly what's going to be on your ballot. And then learn about the candidates. We have listed a few nonpartisan or not Democrat, not Republican sites there that you can check out. Another thing to do is follow us, Disability Vote Coalition on Facebook. We really try to keep all the dates. We send you what's happening, what's current. Right now, we've shared a video that is it's a forum where you can hear all of the Department for Public Instruction, those state superintendent candidates. You can hear them, all 7 of them, answer questions. And that might help you narrow down who you'd like to vote for on February 16th. So follow us on Facebook. And now I'm going to tell you what to do if you run into a problem. So the first thing you could do is contact your election inspector at your polling place or your municipal clerk. Give them a call, talk to them. That's an informal thing. If you're not satisfied, or if you really just feel like it was a big deal, a big violation, and something that you're worried that other voters with similar experiences may not be able to vote because of it or something, there is a way online to file a complaint with the Wisconsin Election Commission. And that is a great way to have your voice heard. And it's a great way to get these things fixed so that no one else experiences them. You can call us. That's that 1-800 number that I was telling you about, the 844-DISVOTE. Or you can email us, and we would love to help you problem solve it. You can also call the Wisconsin Election Protection Hotline, and that number is at the bottom there. Your experiences are really important. And it's just really important that people don't experience obstacles when they go to vote. Voting should be a positive experience and an empowering one, and something that people don't feel hindered to do in the future. So if you do have a problem, please, we would love to help you get it fixed. And then our last slide here is just different voting resources that can help you. A lot of them we've mentioned. That's our contact info at the Disability Vote Coalition. You can follow us. You can join the coalition. The voter hotline. We would love to help you with any questions that you have. And then that's that My Vote site and the photo ID info. Thank you so much for having us. I think I see.
There was just a question about the PowerPoint and maybe whether we can post it. So we can have them share it with us, and then we'll post a link in the what we usually do then is post a link after in the Facebook page. That's the easiest place to get that. So we can create a link, and anybody who's interested, go to the BPDD Facebook page and you'd be able to access the link to the PowerPoint.
And I think our link is that we'll share with you is also fully accessible. We have it on our DVC page.
Oh, you have a link to the
I
to
think
the
so, yeah.
PowerPoint?
It was made accessible, so that's
Okay, yeah, that would be great if you can share
viewers.
that. I don't know if you can maybe throw that in the chat so people who are on the Zoom might be able to access that. And then we could also post it on the, if not, we can follow up after. That's not a problem. Yeah, this was great. You guys must have answered all the questions because there weren't a lot of questions. But we're excited that we were able to squeak this in before the primary. We will have you back before the election in April, right? That's when the general election will be for these different areas. So we will have Wendy and Jenny back to talk about some more voting stuff before the election in April. So thanks so much for joining us. And I'm just waiting to see if Wendy, it's not a problem.
I'm
That's fine.
around here. Sorry.
No problem. We will post it on the Facebook page. We'll get it from Wendy. So if you're looking for it in the Zoom, go to the BPDD Facebook page.
Thank you.
Perfect. No problem.